Okay, we are back with our podcast Roundtable, and it is my privilege to introduce some of my personal favourite podcasts around. On the right of me is Julian from the Strange New Pod. Below me, well, actually, no, he's just suddenly darted down that way. Below me is Rhianna. For Rhianna from the Duras, one of the better half of the Duras sisters, shall we say? Oh. She's not listening, is she? No, that's fine. And to the right, we have Dan from It's Got Star Trek. Dan, are you with us?
I'm here finally.
Fantastic.
I told you I was new about this Discord stuff.
Me too. Don't worry.
It's absolutely fantastic to see you guys here, and thank you very much for joining us, and thank you very much for helping us support the International Rescue Committee. It's a privilege. We have just passed $2,700, which is more than we raised the previous year. So this has been absolutely, this has been really great. If anyone still wants to donate, the donation link is bit.ly/trektime23. If you can only donate $1 or $3, every little counts, whatever you can do. And if you can't donate, please go and tell someone you think might be able to, or spread the word. This donation link will be up for another couple of weeks at least. So even if you know they can't make it live tonight, there's still plenty of time to donate. But without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. So my first question, going around the room, what happened in your life that made you sit at your usual dining table, couch, or seated area, look up from your newspaper and think, I should start a Star Trek podcast? Let's start with you, Julian.
Yeah, so this is actually a really easy question. I was already doing another podcast, and, Captain Pike showed up on Discovery, Mr. Anson Mountain himself, and I said to myself, if they greenlight a Star Trek show with the Enterprise again and Captain Pike and Una, I'm going to start a Star Trek podcast. It was a dare to myself. Well, Paramount called my bluff, and they greenlit the show, and here we are almost 3 years later. So pretty easy. Yeah, it's awesome. I love doing it so much. Thank you, Captain Pike.
Yeah, seriously.
Dan, how about you?
Well, I guess the first time I discovered an interest in sort of this audio medium, I come from a family of people who play musical instruments, and so that's always been a part of my life. And I actually think I met Patrick in Little League Baseball, of all things. I think it was 5th grade, 6th grade or something. And so we kind of knew each other on and off since then. One thing we learned pretty early about each other was we both liked Star Trek. We both ran a BBS in high school. For anyone who remembers, that was the internet before the internet was consumer product. It was like you dial-up modem, that kind of deal, messages and files and stuff. And then in 05, 04, I got an internship at a local radio station. And so I was an intern for there. And then I discovered that I really kind of dug this stuff. And then one day Patrick was just because me and Patrick were always trying to figure out what to do, that's fun and new and interesting. Patrick was like, well, how about a podcast about Star Trek? And I was just like, okay, that sounds great. So it just kind of worked out. And then Jesse, I've known since high school. Me and Patrick have known since high school, and he's always been hanging around too. I've been in bands with him, so it all just kind of worked together.
Amazing. Rhianna?
So my sister and I, we've been Star Trek fans since as long as we can remember. Our dad sort of raised us on Star Trek, and our mom showed us all the movies before 2009 came out, and then we obsessively watched through all of the old Trek shows throughout pretty much by the time my sister was in middle school, but to the time that she was graduating and going to high school or going to college and all of that stuff. So we had spent so much of our childhood watching Star Trek that we were actually in Portland just driving around. We had a wedding there, and my sister is an opera singer, and so all of that same kind of thing. We have a very musical family, and so we're kind of used to this audio medium. We're used to just talking to each other for hours about Star Trek. So we literally were like, why don't we just record this? We literally just have so much good juicy content that we could talk about, and we kind of just took off from there. And it was during the pandemic, so it was kind of the perfect time. We had kind of discussed it, but both of us were in school in about 2019. We were like, it's not the right time. We just do not have the time. And then the pandemic hit, and we were like, oh, look at that, we have the time now. So we figured it'd be perfect. We're a sister duo already, and we thought, who are the most famous sisters? The Duras sisters. Let's be them, and it sort of took off after there. So yeah, it's really just we wanted to talk about Star Trek, and we decided to record it. So it worked out.
It's funny because we also started during the pandemic. So our origin story is we love Star Trek. Let's start talking about it. Let's fill our weeks of free time putting effort into it. And then when the pandemic dropped off, we're like, oh, we don't really have time for this. What should we do? And Captain Maddle's response was, let's start like 5 new different series to talk about different Star Trek stuff. I'm sure we can handle it, guys. It's no problem. So, we've been trying to keep afloat ever since then.
Sure.
We were a pandemic pod too. I think, I think we started around the same time, Rhianna, didn't we?
Yeah,
Like very close,
we
really
were
close.
September, for us.
Yeah, it's just
so.
wild.
The pandemic
I
brought a
guess
lot of good
that's
to the
the
world.
same for us too. I didn't even think
Yes.
about that. Just kind of go figure.
Yeah, I
Quit their
wonder
job
why.
and grew their hair long and make
All
a
this free
podcast.
time, Star Trek podcasts up, birth rates up. I wonder why. Hey, there you are.
Yeah, exactly.
Julian, you recently hosted your Captain Picard week on your channel, an absolutely fantastic week of guests coming in, and you're very gracious to invite us on it, and we had a wonderfully scintillating conversation about Wesley Crusher and Picard's relationship, which was quite fun. What made you come up with the idea of a themed week, and will we be seeing a Captain Jellicoe week next year?
No Captain Jellicoe week. We don't need a Jellicoe show. Sorry. Well, and I do want to say your conversation was fantastic. I think it's funny that you guys had that conversation, and now there's like a whole nother layer to that after Picard season.
Yes,
3.
that's true, actually.
So, I grew up on TNG. Like I'm an '80s baby, and I loved Captain Picard, and I always wanted to do a podcast festival. And as we've been talking about, right, like all these awesome pandemic pods started. And some of the pods that have been on Captain Picard Peak aren't pandemic pods, but we just kind of like
That's the phrase now,
started this
pandemic
family.
pods.
Yeah, pandemic pods, right? We just kind of started this family of podcasts, and I thought it'd be really cool to give each of them a voice and do like this Captain Picard Week festival. And year 1 that we did it before Picard season 2 was super successful, and I didn't know if I was gonna do another one, and I think it was actually you guys, Rhianna and Ashlyn were like, so you
You're a
guys
little
doing
pushy,
Captain-
to be
Yeah, a
honest.
little pushy. You're like, you doing Picard Week too? And
Please, we'll be a part of it.
yeah, and
Okay.
you know what? I was like, screw it. Like, we're doing it again. And I think like we doubled, tripled, maybe quadrupled our numbers from last year with it. It was just so successful. I think even better conversations than last time. And it was so much fun. And of course, Captain Picard Week, it comes right off the tongue, right? Like Captain Picard Day. We are doing another festival next year, co-hosted by the Duras sisters. We're doing the Last Days of Disco, which is going to be a 1-week tribute to
Oh,
Discovery.
1970s.
Such a good name.
Yeah.
Such a good name.
That was probably the hardest part, was coming up with the naming.
It was.
honestly.
There was a fierce vote. So,
Yeah.
but that is going to be our 3rd ever podcast festival, and we are delighted that Rhianna and Ashlyn are helping to host that with us. So.
You can only do it though if you're wearing big afros, flared trousers, and there's a disco ball in the background though. That's
Yes,
it's
with
got to
the
be the
disco
Bee Gees
shirts.
on.
I did put sparkles on Discovery's saucer section for the logo.
Nice.
So there are sparkles,
Yes.
and there might be a disco ball behind me next year. So fingers
Awesome.
crossed.
Yes.
But sorry, not sorry, Jellicoe. My bad. dude.
Yeah.
No, you don't want a 4-shift podcast anyway, so.
No, don't need that. No.
Yeah.
All right, Dan. Honest to God, I have never laughed so much, and this is my personal taste, but I've never laughed so much as a podcast as when I first tuned in and you were doing your Shadow Play episode, and just hearing the constant phrase like hologram, some kind of hologram, and just I had to pull over the side of the road because I was crying with laughter. I had to stop. So like, how sick of that sound clip? Like, especially the Chief O'Brien one are like Jesse and Patrick, or do you think like Cyril Lofton's prepubescent tones never get old?
I think that they personally bait me, honestly, during the show sometimes. I think they purposely say lines that will get me to play that line. And honestly, I don't get tired of it. I don't think they do either. So it's just that whole sound clip business, I'm not sure really why that started. I think it's because I got a new laptop and we were just thinking of ways to do it, to add another dimension to the show. It kind of coincided with around when Picard started, maybe a few episodes before. And like I said before, like I've always just really been into sound and music and stuff like that. And so I just think it's really fun to pull out lines and just sort of like, mess with them and stuff like that. So it kind of worked. But yeah, those were really serendipitous, those holograms and the Chief O'Briens, to have those to be the very first ones that I kind of pull out. And those are the ones that seem to stuck the most. That and Balana's on it. So
Yeah,
those are
Balana's
the-
on
those
it.
are the
Yeah,
three, so.
it's got to take
Yeah.
quite a good amount of work for yourself to get like all those sound clips out. You know, like I put in as much. I mean, when we do our episode reviews, I'm like, we're just reviewing the episode and we're doing that. I don't have time to do all the cutting up. But like, you know, do you get what's like, you know, you put a lot of work into doing that, but do you get what's it's called? I had to look this up. Sorry, I'm not that intelligent. I did do a bit of googling, but it's called semantic satiation. When you hear a word too many times, it gets weird. You know, if you say like thrust too
Okay,
many
that's
times.
what it's called.
Yes, that's what. Yeah, semantic satiation. Yeah, I had to look it up.
Yeah, so I didn't know what that was called, and I was actually referencing that in one of our episodes because the first time I remember experiencing that was in college when one of our math professor kept using the word toboggan as a word problem, and after a while I just started going crazy. All I heard was toboggan. I didn't know what it meant anymore. I didn't know what anything was anymore, and it still haunts me. So yes, that happens, and that actually is kind of like the inspiration for one of like these mini game shows that we do where we play a sound clip, where I play a really small sound clip, and you try to guess what context it plays within the line. So it might be just a small clip of Riker like laughing in a funny way or something, and you just play that 10 times over and over again, and then when you play it the full clip with that sound included, it sounds ridiculous. It sounds like someone's cut in a silly sound. So yes, yeah, I do get that, and that's the inspiration for. I believe the current name of the game show is guess the context based upon the short portion of the sound. That's the
Really
name
rolls
we
off the
came up with. Yeah, exactly, and it changes from week to week too. So yes, I definitely get that a lot, but I try to use it to my advantage. So.
For me, it's the word trek. I've seen it and heard it so many times, I don't even know what it means anymore. We even called one of our series Trek, you know, like a trek through Star Trek.
Yeah.
So the next one's going to be called Trek, something like that. I don't know.
We keep adding a
big
Trek every
donation coming
episode.
Yeah.
A big donation from WRG Matt.
Oh.
Hope to see you on the WRG spot on next year's charity show. So thank you very much for the donation.
Takes us over 2,800. Got to do another giveaway. Otto, do you want to take? You're on the document, I assume. Do you want to take the next question?
No, but I will ask my own question because I'm just like that. Like I said, we've started a lot of different series, and we're always messaging each other. What if we did a new series on this? And you know, it's like Netflix binging. You pick up 8 different shows, and you don't necessarily finish all of them. And with Star Trek, it's got such a massive catalog, so many things to talk about. I was listening to Duras Sisters Pod and their section on family recently. So, how do you guys decide? What new stuff do you want to talk about? Do you want to talk about certain topics in specific? And there's got to be stuff on the back burner. We all have stuff on the back burner that we're never going to get to that we really want to talk about.
Yes,
So, Rhianna,
yeah.
how about you start us off with that?
Yeah, you know, it's really fun because Ashlyn and I have a blast getting to decide what our series is going to be each time. And this sort of started out as us not wanting to just do a review show of Star Trek. We didn't really necessarily want to go in order of every episode, and we wanted to sort of take Trek through all of these different angles. And so that's why we started the pod sort of based on a series theme. So we started with pilot episodes to like start everyone off. You know, we're starting the podcast, therefore we're going to give you the pilot review of every single Star Trek pilot. And it's been really fun because actually right now my sister and I are on a catch-up series, and because we have so many new shows coming out all the time
Red alarm,
that we probably
red alarm, red alarm.
Thank you, Giraffe, for following. Sorry, we have very
You're
inconsiderate alerts.
I love it. That's a really great alert, actually. Yeah, and so we realized, like, we only have, like, 3 or 4 Strange New Worlds episodes up total, which is just not fair to the show, obviously. Like, that's the hardest part about not being a review show, is that we don't get to review episodes that are, like, new coming out each week. And so we have actually, our second series ever was Family, and so we are now going back and covering the family moments in the shows that we haven't like gone to yet, or we were just like, this show isn't out yet, so we have no clue, or we just don't have enough content. Like with Prodigy, we had to wait until, and we're glad we did, obviously waited until the entire first season was complete to do our family series. But yeah, I think for us the process is sort of just, we write down a gigantic list and then we each just switch off choosing the topic. I think really our only like hard no's are doing like really similar themes back to back. So when I chose villains, Ashlyn was like really wanting to do Mirror Universe, but we're like, we can't. Like it's just too similar, and we'd be talking about basically villains again. And so we're gonna wait to do Mirror till it's like we have some palette cleansers, and we try to do themes that are feeling really different. Like it kind of works out honestly, because sometimes I'll choose a really dark theme. Like I'm like, let's talk about like, I don't know, let's get into villains, or let's talk about family or something. And then Ashlyn's like, now let's talk about movies. Like we're just gonna have a really great time talking about all the
Let's
Star
talk
Trek
about
movies. And so,
Shinzon. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Which is great because that means we can hopefully talk about this new Section 31 movie, like add it to our movie series. And so this is the joy of like doing the podcast the way we do, is that we're always adding on to our new series, and we're always like, okay, you know, we're gonna cover Picard time travel because now it's happened. But when we were on our time travel series, Picard season 2 had not come out, so we were like, there's no time travel yet. So it's been really fun, and we just finished up our holodeck series. Now we're catching up and just doing kind of a lot of housekeeping of like, we're just gonna go back to the beginning, cover all our series again on the stuff that we missed. So it's gonna be really fun, kind of chaotic right now in this transition period, but we love having themes. It creates such a fun way also to have guests on, because like you literally can only, you of course can watch the entire episode, but we have these massive watch lists. Julian knows, he's been on our pod. Like we literally, for our first Officer series, we're like, here's like 15 episodes for you to watch about Riker. Enjoy. Like have fun with your full-time job.
Which
and all
wasn't a
that.
problem with me. Like
Yeah.
I love any Riker. Any time to celebrate this man is.
It's perfect. Exactly. We figure people aren't going to complain about getting to rewatch Star Trek. So we always make our watch list like very intense, very deep. We like to do really deep dives and stuff. And it's really fun to see our guests be like, it was so frustrating only getting to talk about like the 2-second family clip in this entire episode. I'm like, yeah, that's how it goes. Sorry. Like it's best of both worlds, but we're not talking about that. Like, so it's just really interesting and a fun way to look at it for sure.
Awesome. How about something you've probably asked lots of other people, but never been asked yourself? What got you into Star Trek? Julian, start with you.
What got me into Star Trek? My mom had it on the television. It was that simple, and from there I was hooked. I can't really go into more detail. I have her to thank for this love and obsession of mine that I literally would not be here without, and she is the main cause of that. So she passed when I was 5. So big credit to her, because I don't think. Thank you. I wouldn't have had it without her. So I know that's a very simple and boring answer, but
Not boring at all.
We had the same conversation when we had a chat with some of our subscribers, and then literally 80% of the answers were, "Oh yeah, my dad, my nerdy dad sat me down and then sat and watched Star Trek." It's like, okay, this is probably the familiar theme. How about you, Dan? What was the catalyst into you going, "Wow, yeah, I like this shit"?
Well, I think it was some of my earliest memories, you know, when you're a kid and you're just starting to get memories and you have these scenes in your head that are just like forever imprinted, like without context in your head. And one of them is, for whatever reason, I mean, I guess whatever reason, it's one of the most famous episodes, Arena from TOS. Like just that whole scene, like I've had that in my head my whole life, and I don't know even the first time I saw that episode, but I always remember I was fascinated by it. And then vague memories watching Nickelodeon and seeing the animated series. But really, I think I'm also TNG is where, yeah, for me as well, is where I really got into Star Trek, because that's when the family, me and my mom and my brother would get together, and we would eat dinner in front of TNG, and it's just like, I don't know, it just there's just really warm memories about like that whole experience, you know, and yeah, and since then I just was after that I was just hooked, and I just kept watching more and more and more. So it really began a long time, but the TNG is really what got me back into it. I remember even hearing the first ads for TNG when it was first coming out. And I was like, oh, neat, more Star Trek. And that back then I was like, I'd watch it here and there as a kid. And then the TNG came, and that just like, I was in it from there on out. So.
How about yourself, Rhianna? Oh, I think you already said Rhianna, didn't you? Yeah. You kind of said you and your sister, so I got into it, you know, when you went and saw the film. So, yeah, you've already answered that question. Sorry, that was the giveaway alert. Congratulations, Scholar. You've won System Shock Enhanced and a plushie. Sorry, Otto.
Julian, do you also do Star Wars content on your pod? I noticed you have Ahsoka and Bo-Katan.
Say it ain't so.
I don't. I did on my old pod, but we unfortunately shut that down. This will be said here first. I've had inklings of possibly bringing that back, but I just don't have the time right now. Yeah. No, I don't. But I also they're like my two favorite Star Wars characters, so I have to have
Great
them on my
characters.
wall of Trek as well. So Ahsoka Tano is like one of my heroes. Ahsoka Tano, and they don't make posters of her, but like Jaina Solo, Ahsoka Tano,
yeah.
and Bo-Katan are
From the
just
old
all my
Legend
favorite
stuff.
Star Wars characters. Yep. So
Love that.
yeah, maybe one day we'll do some bonus pods on Ahsoka. I need to go on a podcast to talk about Ahsoka because I need to put my feelings out in the world with that show coming out.
Totally.
Definitely.
I want to ask you guys a question. Maybe you can help me out because we're still trying to figure out the answer to this ourselves as a Star Trek podcast. How do you decide whether you're going to cover something as a fan and just geek out and have a good time with it, or try to maybe elevate it a level to more of an analyst, critical type role? Because I listened to Julian, your recent pod with Todd Stashwick, and if he came on our show, I'd be like, doing all the groundwork, trying to ask the smartest questions I can. But then he comes on and starts geeking out about Dungeons and Dragons. And I'm like, oh, he's kind of one of us. So how do you guys balance, okay, let's just have fun with this episode, or maybe let's do a little more research, deep dive, and try to break things down a little more analytically?
Well, I mean, it's a good question. With Todd, it depends on the guest, right? Todd is a known geek. I mean, if you've seen his basement, it is a shrine of just nerdom. So you go in a podcast knowing that he's one of us, so you're going to take that a little bit more casually. You're still going to ask him important questions, but we did an interview with Fred Tatasciore, and I don't know if that was as deep and analytical because he's also like a comedian, but it was, I don't know. I just don't know. Like, we have an episode coming out. This isn't an ad, but this is my best example.
Oh,
that I
no,
can
feel
think of
free.
right now.
Promote.
We have an episode coming out on Thursday where Eric and I interviewed Freddie Weidman and Stephen Barton, who did the score for Picard season 3, and that's very, I would say, analytical because we're really going in and talking about the music. But I think there's always a happy medium where you could do both, where you could really deep dive it and be analytical, but still have fun. I think when we don't have guests actually is when we deep dive and get more into the analysis, and we're not always kind, and I think we're kind when we need to be, and we're critical at the same time. So it just depends. It just depends on the episode, who's on, and what the subject matter is.
It can be hard to sometimes separate between being a fan of something and being a fan of enjoying a show on its own or enjoying it as a Star Trek fan. I don't know. Enjoying it as a Star Trek fan, you'll give it certain leeways in some respects, but in other ways you'll be extra harsh on it in other ways too, because you might give it certain plot leeways because it's like, oh, that's just Star Trek. That's just how they do things. But then sometimes someone might be more critical, be like, that's not a Star Trek thing to do, so I don't have an answer for how we decide to do it, but that is definitely a challenge to come at it from the side of when to come at it as a Star Trek fan and when to come at it from just like a TV show fan. I'm not like a film major or anything. I don't have any credentials or anything like that, and I wouldn't pretend that I know all about that stuff. I do watch a whole lot of TV, but I mean that doesn't mean anything. But I guess it's good for something. But yeah, pretty much trying to figure out when to go at it from to try to separate yourself more objectively and see how it works in the plot, and then how it works as a Star Trek show. And that can be really difficult because sometimes I'll find myself getting a little too analytical and be like, well, it doesn't matter. I'm having fun. So, I don't know. That definitely is a good question.
I want to just piggyback off what you said real quick, Dan, because I think you're absolutely right. In previous shows like Prodigy and Strange New Worlds, especially like Picard season 1 and 2, been a lot more critical and analytical. But I went into Picard season 3 as a Star Trek fan, and I maybe went arguably a little too easy on it. But that crew and that that kind of storytelling is what I grew up on and is very important to me. So I even said it, I went in with a little bit of blinders on, but I also think that's okay. Sometimes we just need to go into these podcasts and into these shows remembering that at the end of the day, we're also fans, and this is something we love and we just want to enjoy. So no, I think that was a great point that you made.
Yeah, and that point too about in the end we're just fans. It's okay to be critical, but we are fans. I mean, at the beginning of season 3 of Picard, Patrick started the podcast with, "Look, we just want to make sure everyone understands we're Star Trek fans. We like Star Trek. We're doing this
Yeah.
because we like Star Trek." But you're allowed to be critical.
Yep.
And there's constructive criticism obviously, and there's non-constructive criticism, and it's. And we want to get in the boat of constructive criticism, but also in not forget that it's Star Trek and it's fun and we love it. So
I mean,
keep that perspective.
we very recently reviewed The Naked Now and Code of Honor like in a back-to-back situation. Then that's a test of like, oh, how are we reviewing this? Like, we're just gonna poke it. Like, you just got to poke it and take the mick out of it because you know it's bad. You know it's bad. But if you're having fun with the review on that side of it, then that's how you do it. Whereas if it's something like The Wounded or The Drumhead, then you approach it from a different angle. I think it does depend on. It's a bad episode, a funny episode, a deep episode. Like that's where Star Trek is good. Star Trek has the full gamut of good to awfulness, really. Which is why when people say like this episode was terrible, I'm like, well, yeah, but some Star Trek episodes are terrible. That's precedent.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we did Open Pike and talked about the cage, and that's like a horrible episode, right? But like you could have fun and still be very analytical, and we had a blast tearing that apart.
I'm torturing
Julian. We all agree that we absolutely love the cage, so I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay, what? The cage is so bad.
But there's a lot of good bones in the cage.
Yeah, it's got the
Okay, there are.
structure. Yeah.
Yes.
There's some good things about the cage, but
So there's a lot to be said about sharing experiences and learning from other people's point of view. Shai, we're so glad to have him join us in the last year because he knows what it's like to be in front of the camera. He has a lot of insight on directorial choices, that kind of thing. I told Rhianna recently, I only recently started listening to Duras Sisters. I'm going to be listening to a lot more because I really want to hear the point of view from women in Trek, and that's not something that I've had personally growing up. So, yeah, the more people you expose yourself to, the more you're obviously going to learn from their experiences, and that's why it's great. I'm just nerding out about.
I think what's
I'm
interesting.
hanging out with other Star Trek nerds. Usually, I'm stuck with Captain Idol and Shiaporn, and that's all I have. So
I love listening to other podcasts. Like you mentioned, women in Trek fandom. Like I listen to the Women at Warp podcast.
Oh, we love them.
Quite a bit.
Yes.
They're great. And I can only assume you have a rival podcast named the Delaney Sisters, right? Like, you guys just face off.
Please, some sisters start that because
I would love that.
Yeah, we didn't even think about the Delaney sisters when we were thinking about famous.
Nobody
Trek
thinks
sisters.
of the
That's
Delaney
awesome.
sisters.
Yeah, I think it's really important what everyone was saying about like it also really depends on the show or the episode that you're covering. And for us, since we're covering like whole shows through a theme, it just depends because I feel like that's sort of the beauty of having more than one host, and I have so much respect for people who can just like host a podcast on their own. Like that's so daunting, and I could definitely not do this without my sister. And I think that it also helps just to create like a really different balance. And we kind of joke that I'm definitely the more like I had a philosophy minor, like I'm an English major. I'm very much like really want to take the deep dives, really want to get analytical and serious. And my sister can get that way totally, but she also will just be like, what? Like, now let's laugh and talk about this hilarious moment. And so it's perfect. Like, it really makes the podcast kind of this like perfect balance because we call ourselves a philosophy podcast. And I think we definitely do those deep dives, especially if we're talking about a series like Family. Family is insanely intense. Like, Star Trek characters do not have happy families. And so we're obviously going to be talking about a lot of trauma, a lot of like really serious stuff. But even in our like most serious family episodes, we'll still be cracking up about like Riker being like wild girl of the woods, to Kestra. Like there's still some really funny moments that you can like pull out of it. And so I think it's nice to have a co-host who can be silly and who we can like, plus we're sisters and we have so much like just chemistry from being literal best friends since birth that like we just know sort of the theme and the vibe of the episode going in. If we're like, this is going to be pretty serious because we have like 5 really heavy hitter episodes, then like, yeah, the tone's going to be pretty dark and we're going to be halfway through like, are you guys okay? Like, drink some water. This is pretty serious, but I think too, it also depends, being a Star Trek fan versus being like a Star Trek critic. I think that Ashlyn and I have kind of a difference in what shows are our favorite. I'm a Deep Space Nine person for sure, and she's definitely more TNG/Voyager, so depending on the week. And obviously we love them all in different ways, and sometimes TOS is my favorite show. Like, it truly depends. But I think also, like Julian was saying, the blinders do come on for both of us in different shows. But the other person doesn't really have that. So it works out great because I'm like, I love everything about, like, Move Along Home, even though it's an awful episode. I still love it. I treasure it because it's Deep Space Nine and it's, like, funny and just, like,
Where are my
not
clumpies?
war-oriented. Like, Ella Moraine,
the
let's
third
go,
shot?
you know.
Don't do it.
And so I have blinders. I'm like, gorgeous, glorious episode. And Ashlyn's like, no, it's like really poorly written and kind of trash. And I'm like, I know, but like, I love it. And so it's nice because then she can also sort of point out some of the stuff that maybe are like issues or whatever. And the other thing I do want to say is that it is just nice that we're both women because I think it does sort of take us into this like other perspective that maybe a lot of other people aren't thinking about. Because like half the scenes I'm like, why aren't the women speaking? Where's Troy's lines? Why is she just saying, I don't know, half the time? And so it's really important, like, that we did our feminism series. We didn't want to do it, like, right off the bat, because we're not trying to be like, we're just about women, you know? Like, obviously, Trek is filled of men and non-binary people now, and just, like, everybody, and it's amazing. And so, but we really wanted to celebrate the women of Trek, and also realize, and have people realize, like, yo, there's still a lot of progress that needs to happen, and there's still a lot of, like, BS happening in Trek for feminism as well. And so it was really fun. We got Jara Hodge from Women at Warp for our Janeway episode when we were talking about just like her in general. So it's been really fun. And I think it's nice to be able to like have so many discussions with other podcasts because like you all said, you get different perspectives and obviously don't have a male perspective on Star Trek. So it's really fascinating to get to have guests who are like just from completely different walks of life. And it helps us too, to make our pod really interesting. And we tend though that when we have guests, like they can get really deep with us, but we usually just have a blast. We're usually just like cracking up, joking, like all that kind of stuff. And then when we're together, we're like, okay, let's talk about like the morality of Tuvix or like something, you know, let's talk about similitude or whatever. So it's really, it's a fun time for sure.
Listen, if you need a
We're all
privileged
big-
white guy, we're here. Sorry, Dan, go on.
I was just gonna say we're all big DS9 fans too, and Patrick is continuously defending Move Along Home, so that's fine. I'm starting. He's starting to bring me to his side on that one.
Nice. That's what we like to hear.
I also want to give mad props to your feminism series, by the way, because
Thank
I could be dead wrong about this.
Wasn't me. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
We have triggers.
I like triggers. I think that's actually. I think it was a series before that I started, but I'm just gonna say it was the feminism series that I started with you guys on, and you're one of like 3 Star Trek podcasts I listen to. So, but you know that. Right?
Wow, honored. Yeah. Thank you.
You
And
definitely.
it's fun too because there's
Yeah,
like
sorry.
not a lot of all women pods. Definitely more. I mean, Women at Warp. Jara was saying when they started, they were the only like all women Star Trek podcasters. That was like 10 years ago. So obviously there's so many more now, but it's still very, very small. Like it's a very small community of like, obviously, you know, there's people who have like women and men hosts or like a bunch of both, which is great too. I love obviously any kind of voices we can have, but it's really fun to be able to sort of connect with a lot of the other like all female pods, like Where's Beverly. If you don't know their podcast, like please go check them out. They're like really, really funny and
So
just
good.
truly kindred spirits to Ashlyn and I. So it's really fun. Like we had them on our feminism series as well, and they're just fantastic.
I had a point and I've forgotten what it was.
Well, all right, let me springboard off that then and ask you guys in turn what advice you give to someone who wants to start their own podcast. Because while it is sort of a welcoming space, it also can be cutthroat to people's time. We only have so many hours in the day to listen to all this different stuff. And we're all kind of, in a sense, competing in the same space. So, Dan, if someone wanted to start their own, would you say it's a lost cause, or has the journey been worth it just for the friendships that you build?
Well, I guess it defines what you're looking, what lost cause is defined by, and like what are you looking to get out of it. It is very specific.
Red alarm.
But
Red alarm.
Thank you, Dexter,
Red
for following.
alarm.
Sorry.
it's a very specific and but worthwhile and close-knit group of people I've found, and it's been awesome finding this circle of people. If you want some sort of basic advice though, like stick with it if you really are serious about it, stick with it for a while, because people there's a million podcasts out there and a million people starting podcasts, but not millions of people continuing to do podcasts. So people are going to probably look with some skepticism if you only have 10 or 20 episodes. That's fine. Just know that you're going to have to get like a cache of episodes stored up before people are going to start taking you seriously. Also, it's my opinion that you should always try to do it like, everyone has their method, but we've always tried to make it a point to release it at the exact same time every week, just so because people also need to know what to expect, and like when to expect it, and just have something to rely on.
We're still hooked on that, like, it's 9 o'clock. This is when the news is on. This is 10. People still want their schedule. They like to know, like, oh, it's Wednesday night.
People are creatures of habit.
Yeah.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
But yes, to answer your question, yes, it's absolutely been worthwhile. I loved it, and it's given me like, just it's been a great outlet, and even saying it that way feels like it's kind of undercutting it in some way, because like it's just to say, oh, it's been a great way to blow off steam. Like, no, I mean, it's really been meaningful in my life to be able to do this and connect with people in this way and talk about what I love, and you get to do creatively what I like to do too. It's a lot of work to do the audio stuff like you asked earlier. It is actually a lot of work, especially when the new episode comes out Thursday and we have to do something Friday night. I generally watch the episode, watch it a second time, taking notes, pull out the sound clips, which the sound clips alone take anywhere from 2 to 3 hours, depending on how I'm feeling that night about how whatever the word is. But it's worth it. It's totally worth it because it allows me to be creative too. So yeah, I've loved it.
I think like we've approached it from the when we started like years ago as Timelines Talks, we were just doing like Star Trek timelines. That was our thing because that's what we did. But we came for the approach of like, well, we all get on along really well. We're enjoying this, even if we have like 2 viewers, 3 viewers. We're still going to do this because we're enjoying doing it, and that kind of carried on. And we have a fair amount of like anywhere between 15 to 50 viewers. It just depends on the week, the content, and the mood. But it's enjoyable, and it is enjoyable getting that feedback. But I think like we always have the opinion of like, we've had a great show, I've had a laugh, I've enjoyed myself, I'm satisfied, this has been worth it. And I think if I'm a musician myself, and I feel like I do things for other people's enjoyment, and if I get the feedback from that kind of enjoyment, that makes it better. So I always like getting feedback from people and people saying like, oh, I enjoyed that, oh, this is really funny, or like, and on the flip side as well, people saying like, I don't think that worked, I'm don't find that, okay, no, I'm listening, we need that kind of stuff as well. But I think it's definitely me and Auto and Stars and Shy all sitting down together and just being idiots for a couple of hours.
Yeah, exactly. Me too.
That's putting it nicely, by the way.
I came to the podcast as a listener, and Dan, you were talking about consistency. Like every Wednesday at 3:30, I knew I could tune in and
fall asleep.
Get lulled to sleep with their voices for a nice afternoon nap, and so it was a nice consist. But I would wake up and hear some nice fun content later on in the podcast. So
I was going to say real quick, when we switched, we used to release on Saturday afternoons, and then we switched to Mondays, and that actually our downloads took a hit from that transition. They came back, but it just goes to show you it does make a difference even when you just switch times. So anyway,
I would also say, especially with like, I think there's some crazy statistic now about how many podcasts there's going to be in the next like 10 or 20 years. It is quickly overtaking radio. It is insane how many podcasts there are. The most important thing I would say is have a theme. It's totally cool to say, hey, I want to do a Star Trek podcast, and then if you want to just go and do TNG and then DS9 and then Voyager, like you could do that. But this is maybe going to come across as harsh, but there's already a ton of Star Trek podcasts that do that. Have an idea. Have something unique. Like, I started this because I wanted to talk about the Enterprise and I wanted to talk about Strange New Worlds. And yeah, this pod evolved into something a lot more than that. But at the end of the day, we always do come back to Strange New Worlds. Like we just did the teaser breakdown. And that's, I think, why a lot of people still follow us, is like we are, we are a Strange New Worlds podcast. So have a plan, have an idea, make friends. I think some people do sometimes think that it is a competition. It's not. Like, no. I don't see myself like competing with other pods. Like I'm a competitive person by nature, so sometimes I'm like, oh, like their numbers are better than ours. But like at the same time, we wouldn't do things like Captain Picard Week if if you know it was a competition.
yeah.
It's about building a really strong community and be a part of that. Reach out, ask for advice, ask for help, ask to guest. The best way to gain traction as a podcast is to go on other podcasts and do that. Ask the community. 99% of the time is one of the most welcoming communities in fandom. So have a plan, have a theme, reach out, build the community.
Except those
No,
Delaney sisters. Screw them.
Screw the Delaney sisters.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah, I think those are all excellent points. And another thing I want to mention is like expectations going into the pod. For my sister and I, we literally were like, we don't care if no one listens to this.
Yeah.
And we're not saying that just because now people listen to us. Like, we legitimately did not care. Because it's just like, we wanted to do this, and if it brings some people joy, even if it's just our mom, like, great, you know. And she is our first and probably our largest supporter, which is awesome. And of course, like, we love our mom, we are so here for her. But like, we also have people from like international fans who have literally listened to our pod multiple times through, which I can't even fathom, like, listening to my voice for that long, but that's amazing, you know, that people love us that much. And I think that it really comes from a place of like, we just wanted to create something awesome, and we're so glad that people like it, and we're so glad. And I think it's also about not compromising once you, like, quote unquote become big or become like bigger, you know, compromise what you are as a pod just to like, okay, cool, well, we didn't like this certain episode, so, but let's not drag on it because other people liked it. No, like, you do you, because otherwise you can't just cater to everyone. You got to be yourself. And I think a lot of the times with my sister and I, like, we will accidentally go on 10-minute tangents about Janeway in a Deep Space Nine pod because we love Janeway. We're like really obsessed with Janeway. And we're not taking it out because it's a Deep Space Nine pod. We're like, sorry, we talked about Janeway for 10 minutes. Like, if you don't like that, whatever, skip for that. And so I think also what we sort of realized coming into it is that, like, exactly what Dan was talking about. It's also just waiting and waiting for those numbers, taking like a lot of time to maybe not get a lot of results at first. And that's totally fine. Like, I mean, Ashlyn and I do all the editing, everything. It's just the two of us, like, all social media, and it's exhausting sometimes. Like, I'm gonna be honest, like, there's some days where I'm like, I literally, editing this podcast sounds like my worst nightmare. Like, I do not want to do it. But then you take a break, you watch some Star Trek, you come back in an hour, you're like, okay, I can do this now, it's fine, I'm over it. And so I think it's also about just like remembering that you are kind of creating a small business on your own or with whatever co-host you decide to have. And so it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of effort in the beginning, and then it'll start becoming more seamless as you go. But it really starts with that. It starts with a lot of hard work up front and just like a lot of faith that what you're doing is good. You know, you've got to have that faith of the heart, or like, what are we doing here, you know? And as Trek fans, they'll come through for you. The people who like your pod, they'll tell you. And I think it was probably, we were in our like close to ending our family series, our second series, before we got asked on the Nerd Trek podcast. And that was our first time being a guest. And like, oh man, I was probably like the most nervous I ever was, but it was a blast. And we realized, oh my God, people care about our opinions. They want to hear from women who like Trek. They want to hear from us, you know, not just some random women. They want to hear from us. And that's just like such a crazy feeling. And exactly agreeing with all of what you're saying. It's just, yeah, trusting it. And if it's a lost cause, well, then I'm the Quat lot. Like, I don't care. I'm gonna be fighting for it forever. Like, I love it. I love Star Trek, and it honestly, this podcast has like really, really helped with my mental health and like just being around, having something to get out of bed for. You know, I think that right now I'm unemployed, so it's like been a really tough time financially and all this stuff. But when I'm like unemployed on a Tuesday with nothing to do, I'm like, I can also like make a bunch of pod content, or I can literally have like a 4-hour meeting with my sister about the pod, where it's only really a meeting for half an hour and then we talk for the other 3. But like, it's just, there's something about the podcast community and the Star Trek community that like actually makes me want to get out of bed and makes me want to like create and try new things, even if with I'm scared or anxious. Like, it's just incredible. And so even for that, that's like worth it to me, is because this community is so amazing. And I'm sure there's other amazing podcast communities, but Star Trek feels like the top to me. Like, it just feels like I've made some of my best friends from this podcast community. So yeah, just trust in yourself. Yeah.
just to touch on what Rhianna just said earlier about time, make sure you have the time, because even if you're just starting or you're, a more established podcast, it is a lot of work if you're not just going to throw it right up onto the internet, right? Like this past week, for example, was a full-time job. Or 2 weeks ago. Was it 2 weeks ago? I don't know. This week with, because Strange New Worlds is our thing. It was the Picard finale. We recorded our episode for next week because that's when guests were available. So it was a full-time job. It really is. And, no, most of the time, 9 times out of 10, podcasts ain't making you any money. So it is a labor. It is a literal labor of love. We do it because you love it. And that's what it comes down to. It is a passion.
Yeah. We had that conversation with us very early on when we said look, we have this option on Twitch to do we do subscribers, and we sort of said well, what do we want to do, 30-30 split and something like that? And I think it was you or two or Stars came up with why don't we just put it in a pot and then we'll do a charity show, or we'll just give it away, because that way we feel like we're doing something good and we just give it away, and then it's not serious money. It's taken us a year to raise £340, so it's that kind of thing. But it feels better when we do just now, and I'm dropping £340 and hitting a load of donation goals. So that was kind of our philosophy, especially around the financial side of things.
Speaking of donation goals, a couple have come in. One from It's Got Star Trek. Dan, if that's you, thank you very much. One from Cranky, who says, I haven't donated in a while, so ... Thank you, Cranky. A big one from Smock Telly Helly, who says, live long and prosper. Just to put a bow on this topic, no one asked my opinion, but I'm going to share it anyway, because that's what podcasting is all about. At first I thought, the view count started to grow. What if it's about views? What if it's about money? Can we make something like this sustain? And I realized quickly that it wasn't actually about any of that. The best stuff to come out of that, I had my friend Stars and Garters Finn, who's one of a regular host, came to my place. I got to cook for him. We got to sit on the couch and tear apart terrible Star Trek, just busting a gut. And I'm like, if it wasn't for the show, I would have had to make the weirdest Craigslist ad ever to get that experience in my life. So I'm glad that I got it that way. And then events like this charity show, the print behind me for my late pet was given to me by 2 of our viewers. So it's there's such an outpour. That Star Trek community is just the best. Like you said, Rhianna, everyone is so generous. And
I have this cross stitch. It's one of my favorite things. It's so good.
That's awesome.
I know. I have a little.
That's
awesome. So bad.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That's one of my treasured possessions, and that's from one of our good friends who comes and does Star Trek adventures with us. So it's things like
Epic.
that.
So if you do end up starting a podcast or just a small group to talk about the stuff, the rewards that come will not be numerical. They're going to be really cool stuff from people that love the same things that we love.
Totally.
Thank you for coming on to the podcast, you guys. It's been an absolute pleasure. And like you say, Julian, it's about reaching out and sharing with other. We're not in competition. We're all loving Star Trek together. So, Dan, thank you for joining us. Rhianna, thank you for joining us. And Julian, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
No, you're always welcome anytime we
it.
do this. So, we're going to play some What the Dub. You guys are welcome to stay and play some What the Dub Trek with us. It's insane. If you've got a bounce, that's absolutely fine. But I think I need to assemble the Trek Time horn and get the other guys back in here and blow the horn. I'm going to very quickly go to the toilet, and then we'll play some What the Dub.
So much information. Curious, do you announce when you're going to the bathroom?
I mean, I do. Sometimes in the middle of the night, I wake the wife up and tell her, and she gets very annoyed. It's darling, come on.
I mean,
I have to go.
Eric eats ice cream on our pods.
He's having a great time.
He's having a time of his life.
One of my favorite moments, they were recording live. They're doing a live stream. And I just moved, so I was in the wrong time zone. I didn't realize it. I come on and start eating potato chips into the microphone. And they're trying to have a serious discussion about one of the movies. And I'm like, wait, are we live? And they just lost it. They're like, yes, you idiot. We've been live for the last 40 minutes.
I thought he was doing a bit. I thought he was doing an eating bit or something. I was like, okay, he's got
just
some
enjoy your
going
chips. That's fun. That's phenomenal. Wow.
Well, the best is when you're trying to open a chip bag quietly, but of course that somehow makes it louder. I don't know when you're
exactly. The chips know. They always know.
Yeah.
Right. For us, it's the mechanical keyboards. They love to clack away on that. Well,
there's nothing to be done about that because you have to have a clacky keyboard. That's
essential.
I have one.
Professionalism. Now, yeah, Idol could have put out a video of Patrick Stewart talking about our charity, but
Let's just vamp.
Everyone in stunned silence. Do I really need that much attention here? Right, let me boot up Steam. We'll get this going.
Asking that as if you don't love it.
Shut up. Do you know what I can do now? I can actually open a beer because this is the final leg of the show. We're in hour 9 now. Hour nine, and we are nearly at $3,000.
How's that been going for you?
Parts of my body are shutting down. My neck keeps twinging and twitching, and I got about 3 hours sleep last night as well, so that didn't help. Mostly me just sitting there going, is it going to go all right? Is everyone in the chat? Is it going to be fun? Yeah, I waffle. Right, a little bit of setup here. Please talk amongst yourselves while I do this. I just need to check I've got the
If
right
only we
module.
had a world-renowned knighted by the Queen actor who could tell us more about the charity that everyone is donating to.
That's very true. Yeah, why don't I run a video? Let's do that. Here, Mr. Patrick Stewart, what are you doing now? Oh, not a lot. Well, run this video for us.